Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. So this is Net7 and I'm joined by Global Affairs, Anthony Roberto. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Not too bad. So I'm glad that you're on the stream and I'm glad viewers are tuning in. This stream is going to be a second part of my series called Isolationist Hacks and Quacks. Catchy, isn't it?
Yeah,
This,
it's catchy.
this series is the second part in discussing some really hot takes from isolationists across the political spectrum. Last time, in our last episode, we did take on Quick Sticks from Twitter, who I debated in a YouTube debate, and his isolationist positions on North Korea, Iraq, and Iran, and such. And now we're going to discuss um, the another isolationist, this time from the Paleo-Libertarian spectrum, and it's going to be a great topic because we're discussing again how Paleo-Libertarians and Paleo-Conservatives, almost on the whole, I get to find, pretty much think that the Confederacy should have won the war. And this is a laughable position, and I don't understand how anyone could believe this anymore. But there are people who still believe that even in 2021, and it's embarrassingly sad. But I still am looking forward to finding the one libertarian out there who thinks that the South shouldn't have won the war. But here we are. So, Anthony Roberto, have you ever had experience with Paleo-Libertarians like Ron Paul, like Ron Paul, who have said, "Oh, that the South should have won the war, and it wasn't really that bad that they seceded, and it wasn't really about slavery."
Yeah, I've seen a few paleo-libertarians. I argued with one actually a couple of years ago. I think it was it was before the pandemic. I argued with one in this group chat. He described himself as a actual self-described paleo-libertarian. His position, and this is something I guess I get from that side of the spectrum when it comes to foreign policy, is they don't really care. And I think that's seems to be like a lot of the mindset. Like they just don't want a foreign policy when I talk to these people. I remember I was talking about Iraq and Afghanistan, and they were like, "Well, who cares? It's across the ocean. It doesn't matter." And I find that to be kind of like a revolving opinion among a lot of those people. And not even just that though, but also like with other issues as well. It's like, well, I just want to have like limited immigration and I just want to be isolated from the rest of the world. Put on the blindfolds, who cares? It's not our problem. So I think that's like kind of the general mindset. Um, I think I think when it comes to isolationism, I think one thing we always have to remember is that it comes from different angles. And I think when it comes to paleo-libertarians, at least from my experience, a lot of them are just in the I don't care crowd, or even just libertarians or paleos in general.
Exactly, because when it comes to the isolationist cringe out there, it comes from numerous different spectrums. And one of the more concerning parts that I find is is the part on the issue with Neo-Confederate garbage, which is where that the South should have won the war. And you might be surprised that I used to actually believe this stuff in high school. And it's pretty much, and it's a moment of shame of that I have, because I used to actually believe in these ideas. You know, I read this. So there's this book out there, and I'm going to show it to the viewers, so that way you learn to stay away from this cringe. Or better yet, one of you will buy the book, and you'll be able to literally cut it to pieces, bit by bit, and disprove the entire thing, which would be absolutely great. Um, I read this book, and it was called "The South Was Right," and it was written by James Ronald Kennedy and Walter Donald Kennedy. If I remember correctly, I think they were brothers. And I'm going to post it in the comments so you can all find it. This book is essentially Neo-Confederate propaganda. This book that I read, I just passed by it in high school. I checked it out, and I was totally bought into the message. I read the whole book, and I was like, "Oh my God, this is all so true," and this is all saying, "Oh, the Union was so terrible." Oh, the South, yes, had slavery, but it wasn't like the way that they say it was, and all this other stuff. And it was so the problem with this neo-Confederate propaganda is that yes, less and less people are buying into it today, but there are still people who believe this, and it's very you see this more often among the libertarian strains or the paleo conservative strains. I mean, when you these groups of people um, really actually buy into this notion, that they of this that the South or the Confederacy was not really fighting for slavery, that it was fighting for states' rights, which essentially, of course, was slavery because they were fighting for the right to own slaves. Um, and then that there were other economic factors in play, and that there were black Confederate soldiers. Of course, that's disproven. That's largely disproven now because we now know that they weren't really soldiers; they were laborers, and so it's really sad. But the problem is that this people actually buy into this, and MDVet4Peace is one of them. Now, and I find it concerning. I mean, how is it? What do you feel about people like actually buying into the stuff literally in 2020, or when the book came out, which was like in the early 2000s? And the thing is, they actually looks like they now um, they now made a new edition. It appears like I just found. Oh my God! I'm just looking at now that they made a new edition of this book for the if it was published now in 2020. What do you feel about this neo-Confederate cringe?
I mean, of course, I think it's cringe as well. I mean, I think like the biggest, well, I mean, like this is a pretty big conversation. Like as you mentioned, it's the states' rights as it being for them being slavery, which is absolutely abhorrent. It should never happen, whether it be in America or across the world, and we should do everything to eradicate it. But not only that, though, but I find it very secessionist and anti-American. Because if you think about it, like, America, with all of our states, we have to be as a union, right? And, whether if you're from, the West Coast, the East Coast, or anywhere in America, we're united as Americans. And I think, you know, people who want to succeed, like leave the union in any form, whether it be in any state, and obviously, from like the South is also really bad. I just find it fundamentally anti-American. It weakens our union. Like Russia today pushes, California to succeed or whatever from the union, and it's like, and people from these southern states, it's like, why? Like, why do you want to do this? You know, just so you can bring back slaves or whatever. I don't know if they all want to do that though, but it's definitely pretty bad. I think the other thing that's really interesting when it comes to the Confederate flag, when I see it, is the original flag is actually a little bit different. Because I believe there was a flag that was from the 20s or I think the 60s. That's the newer iteration that people use now. That I find that's kind of funny because it's like they're not even using the original flag. They're using like an older version of it, and it's like, oh, excuse me, they're using like a newer modern iteration of it. And it's like I find that just kind of weird. And also when it comes to Southern pride, it's one of those things where it's like I don't mind it on like a general level, but it's like I think there's more to Southern stuff than the Civil War. Like I think there's good food and all that kind of stuff, and it's like why? Why do you want to be tainted with this really bad representation? Why don't you talk about the good parts about the South? Why are you trying to hang on to these really cringy parts? You know, and I just find that really strange, you know. And obviously when it comes to revisionism, I see this a lot from like a lot of far right circles. Some of them, like you mentioned, Paleo-Libertarian, some right libertarians, Paleo-Conservatives in general, dissident right people, some people from the alt right. in those different circles, they definitely promote this kind of stuff. And all of it's just cringe. Fortunately though, I do think, like, in the grand scheme of things though, I think most people don't really believe this though. I seem to more see it from like friend circles on Twitter or Clubhouse or Facebook or YouTube or whatever. So I think, in a broad sense, it's not the mainstream ideology, which is a good thing, and I hope, it never becomes mainstream or anything like that. And of course, you posting that book is very good to debunk this kind of information. So I guess I will start with that.
Yeah, it's extremely important to debunk this garbage, and so let's talk about I like that comment earlier from Paul Chi. South is still 0-1, salty. But let's go to some of these tweets right here and discuss them because I think it's important that we look over some of the cringy content from people like this and examine it, because the problem is that these people promoting this stuff on Twitter and in any social media is just bad, because it gives it's essentially lies, and we know it's lies. And you would think that in particular a person who is a like MDVet4Peace, who's a self-described veteran, would be opposed, obviously, to the Confederacy leaving the Union, and just says no. So I'm going to share the screen so we can view some of these abhorrent tweets. So let's get to it. Okay. So this was a debate that happened a while back ago. A lot of different discussions going on. And this is with Kevin Castley before, there was the split. But I responded to one of the tweets that MDVet made, and I said, right, who did you want to win the Civil War again? Oh, that's right, the Confederacy. Go away, you closet Neo-Confederate. Because we'd had discussions about that before, and he claimed that that wasn't true, never said that. Of course, though, when you say something like this right here, I argue that allowing the southern states to go their own way in peace would likely have hastened the end of slavery, as they carried on with their backwards economy and no longer had borders to police to prevent slaves from escaping, while the remaining Union would have more freedom. That's just not true. If the South had successfully seceded from the Union, they would have also entrenched slavery. And they would have, because I brought that point up right here, the South wanted to protect slavery. That's why they succeeded. Okay. And if you say that the South leaving the Union wasn't really a bad thing and it wasn't going to destroy the Union, you are essentially saying you are okay with the Confederacy winning. There's no way to get around
Yeah.
that.
Well, not only that though, but like a lot of the economy was still very reliant on slavery too when it comes to cotton and whatnot. And wheat picking, like a lot of that was done by slaves. They weren't just gonna abolish the industry. Like they had to do it by, well, I mean, the North had to do it by force.
Absolutely, because of course that's what MDVet argued against, but whatever. Because here's the thing. Because here's the thing right here that was just so important. Okay, if you think that the Union would not have, here's the thing. If you think the Union would not have ended with the South leaving, you're obviously foolish. But this is an important point to make. So how many times do I have to say it? You said you think the Union would have ended if the South had seceded. Okay, so, well, sorry, wouldn't have ended. So I was a spelling error on my part. That means you're okay with Confederacy, who are seceding to protect slavery. By extension, that means you wanted them to win. So if you say that you are okay that you're okay with the South seceding, that essentially means that you wanted the South to win. There's no way around that. If you think that, and And this is essentially one of the funniest tweets I've seen that kind of laughed at, which is where he said, "Wars are a threat to liberty." Well, that's ridiculous because some wars are fought in the name of liberty, just like the Union fighting to free the slaves in the South. And okay, he's such a binary brainlet, okay, yeah, whatever to him. But then he said, this is a funny part. Then you called for war crimes against civilians. And this was his evidence for support for war crimes against civilians, is that I said right here that that Sherman didn't burn enough of the South. Um, First off, when Sherman went through the South, he was burning everything that the Confederacy could use to wage war. All its industrial capacity, farmland, slave-owning residences, everything. And what's the purpose? To end the war, to stop the fighting, to stop the killing. And these people, the slave-owning class, they're not innocent people. The slave owners who literally beat, abused, even raped, sexually assaulted their own slaves, even murdered the slaves who ran away. These people are not innocents. These people are not good people. And I reiterate my point that Sherman didn't burn enough of the South because the South was still able after the war to continue with a system of Jim Crow after they sabotaged Reconstruction. So
Well, yeah, I was just gonna say real quick though, like, and the other thing that I always find that's kind of weird is like we gave so much reconciliation and appeasement towards the South. Like we established Jim Crow. Well, they established Jim Crow in the South. They had a system of sharecropping, which is basically where like they would rent tools and they would barely pay these people. So it's like it's a little better than having slavery though, but that was pretty much the compromise. And then also black people were considered like what 3/5 of a person. So we already did a bunch of compromises with the South even after we won. And I just find it kind of ridiculous though. Like, at this point, it's like, you got your way for the longest time. And we did everything we can to keep the Union together. And we did a lot to pander to them as well for decades afterwards. They can put up their statues and all that kind of stuff. And they're still complaining. It's like, guys, like if this was another kind of conflict, they would have just like they would have never done any of that stuff. So I don't know. I mean, we've given a lot of favors towards them after the war. So I just find
yeah,
it crazy.
yeah, it's queasy and far too many. And that's the thing, I mean, when we look at what we did before the war, I mean, we continually pandered to the racist Southern owning class. And guess what happened? Then they rose up in a rebellion against the Union and against the country to establish essentially a white supremacist state. That's why essentially the Confederacy was fighting. It wasn't fighting because of freedom or like states' rights, whatever. It was fighting because it essentially said our wealth is tied up in slavery. If slavery ever gets abolished, we will lose our money, we will lose our property. So we are going to secede to protect our hold over our property over human beings, and to keep a white supremacist system in which African Americans are at the bottom and we are at the top. So even those who did not own slaves in the South, like the poor a white Southerner, were still fighting for white supremacy because it was a system at least where they had at least a place above someone else. So even if they weren't fighting for, a person to own slaves, they were still fighting for that system of slavery, even if that wasn't their intent. And they were still fighting for white supremacy because they believed that, there was these people are at the bottom and we're at the top, and we're enjoying it.
Yeah, exactly. And not only that though, but like, in the North, just, I mean, obviously there's still a lot of racism in the North and a host of other issues, but like at least in the North, like, they developed trading partners with other countries. It was more industrialized. People actually had uniforms. Like we were at least like getting a little bit better, closer to equality in some ways. And I just find it kind of strange as an American. Like, why would you want to promote that? Why would you want to promote supremacy over another person? Like, yeah, I feel like American values are all about, individual liberty, freedom, and I don't think the Confederacy represents that at all from the founding
Ye-
fathers.
Exactly. Yeah, I made this great point here in one of my responses. Wars waged by tyrants and despots or criminal regimes like the Confederacy, you Neo-Confederate, aka MDVet4Peace, are a threat to liberty. Wars waged against tyrants, despots, and criminal regimes are good. Sherman didn't burn enough of the South. Slave owners aren't people, they're human traffickers. And that's essentially what they were. I mean, a slave owner essentially in the South was a human trafficker.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. And it was it's also one of those things though too. I mean, I know we weren't the last country to do this though, but we were a little bit late when it came to abolishing slavery, and it's like a lot of the world was kind of looking down upon that. Like if you read any text or books or whatever, the French, the British, in other countries, they were kind of like, like, why is this still going on, and I think when we abolished slavery, I think that sent a good message to the world that, like we stay true to our values, and I don't know why you'd want to go backwards on that. That seems kind of silly.
Exactly, and one of the claims that we have to really disprove from the Neo-Confederates, but Paleo-Libertarians like MDVet4Peace and Ron Paul, who kind of like shill for these, the terrible regimes, you know, um, we have to understand that the South wasn't just going to end slavery if they won the war. They were going to continue it. That was their stated goal. I mean, it's not like they did not have any intention of ending it, and they would not have ended it if they had been successful. Um, I remember reading something about that because there's this great magazine called um, Future Magazine. It's from the UK, and they had this great, really good alternate magazine in which they talk about topics like this, in which they discuss, well, what if the South had won? Would slavery have been abolished? What would happen to the face of America? And if they had won, the prediction from this excellent professor, Aaron Sheehan Dean, suggested essentially that not only would the South have continued slavery, for the indefinite future, um, Brazil would have continued it, and Great Britain would have, used it as an excuse to continue slavery in Africa and in India. And not only that, what we call him, what libertarians like against, they usually rail against, imperialism. The British imperialism and French imperialism would have been strengthened without a union to sort of act as a strong and united union to act as a check to them. So this nonsense that the Neo-Confederates bring up, that slavery would have died a normal death even if there had not been war, is just ridiculous because there was too much moneyed interest. There were too many wealthy players who had a vested interest in keeping this system going, and many of them were in the South that they were going to take the risk of war to protect it. And other European businessmen and European powers were South American powers were looking in the wings, kind of waiting to see what the direction the wind would blow. And if the South had won, they would have been emboldened to continue this.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, one thing I always tell people, on Twitter every once in a while is like most tyrannical regimes fall very violently. It doesn't happen very peaceful. You know, we've seen this with a lot of countries or regimes around the world. It's not fun, it's not peaceful, and it's unfortunately a very bloody um way. Because why? Because sometimes getting freedom and liberty comes at a cost. And a lot of that goes with blood spilled. And I just find it super naive that people think that these regimes will just go away peacefully. That rarely ever happens. So I guess that's my message to some of those people, to those people out there.
Absolutely. You know, and I'm gonna find this magazine so that way everyone could take a look and get it because it is absolutely brilliant. And I think that everyone here should read it. And I'm going to include the second edition because that one is a bit more expanded than the first edition. Because this one is just excellent, but it just tells that it just exposed it really is not just like a bunch of no, lay people getting together and saying what they think. These are actual professors, actual historians, actual archaeologists, actual experts in these specific fields who can best tell us who can get best into the minds of the people then and tell us what would have probably happened. And let's go back to some of these other tweets though from this guy MDVet4Peace, because he really just brings up these awful, I mean, god awful takes. I mean, so let's go one. So here's one. Let's see. So he says, I agree slave owners are massive rights violators, and forming or supporting any resistance to them, including violent resistance, is justified. I believe John Brown is justified. Why do you insist on mischaracterizing my point? Yet before that, we just had him say earlier that I argue that allowing the southern states to go their own way in peace, blah, 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 would have been better. I mean, you can't just say that you support people's right to fight against a system of slavery, and then just say, oh well, but letting the South go was the better alternative than war. It's war either way. What makes the difference? It's so for people like this, they're essentially talking. They're essentially giving you double talk. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, exactly. And also a lot of these people never keep their promises too. I mean, it's like any other like very fringe group, whether it be from like the communist side or fascist side, or in this case the Paleo-Libertarians. There's always a lot of double speak. There's always a lot of double talk. There's always a lot of inconsistencies because the biggest thing they do is they lie because they want to assure people they're not as extreme as they are. I mean, war would have broken out at some point, somehow in some way, and maybe it could have been worse. I mean, we don't know. I mean, we're not in that alternate universe though, but I mean, either way, it would have had to go down violently. I mean, whether it be from the Union or internal rebellion, I mean, something's going to happen at some point. I mean, people don't want to be slaves forever. Like we saw that like in places like Haiti where they rose up against the French. So like if it's not happening from the Union, it's going to happen inside this quote unquote Confederate country.
Exactly. What right does anyone have to make someone a slave? And what legitimacy does that have? And so for anyone to say that, well, it's bad, but we shouldn't fight a war over it. No. If the Civil War or the war between the states, whatever you want to call it, was the second part of the American Revolution. It was the unfinished part of our American Revolution, and that we were finally living up to the full ideals of the American Revolution, which was liberty, equality, and justice for all. Not simply for one group of people, Anglo-Saxon or Anglo, men, but for everyone, for African American men, for European American men, and for European American women.
Well, I guess the biggest question I have to ask for these people is, if you're not going to fight for fight against slavery, what are you going to fight against? What is your line at that point? Is there anything else ever worth fighting? I guess that's my question.
Well, that's the problem with libertarian isolationists like MDVet4Peace. They live in a prism of their own privilege. Is that they have Western privilege, and they say that essentially that, well, I want to enjoy the comforts and the benefits of my Western privilege, which is a democratic republic, which is a largely stable system with a good standard of living, but they're unwilling to, fight to give that to other people. They offer lip service and they say, oh well, I feel sorry for those people, but they won't lift a finger to help. That's kind of like they kind of essentially fill those tropes that you get, when like in cartoons or in movies, like when those people like say, gee, this is the life. I wonder what the poor people are doing today. That's essentially what they fill. They're just those libertarian ones where it's like, this is the life. I wonder what the unfree, oppressed people are doing today.
Yeah. I mean, and like, it's like I said before in the beginning, like these people don't really have a foreign policy. It's really just, I don't care. If it's not my problem, I don't care about it. I mean, that's basically their line of reasoning. At least for most of them I've experienced.
Yeah, and let's look at another this tweet right here. This is where he tried to kind of get at me, because we talked about he criticized essentially the suppression of certain journalistic rights during the Civil War. It's kind of hard to see from your view, unfortunately. I tried to, but I'll read it out, where he says, let's see, even here you can't bring yourself to say that the Civil War and World War I censorship was wrong, just that it ended, which still proves that wars and the standing army are a threat to liberty. One, why did you become a veteran then, if that's what you believe? And while I respect your service, look, even for my opponents, I'll respect their service, like MD Vet. But if this is the position you have, where it says right here, and you can see it right there, even here you can't bring yourself to say the Civil War and World War I censorship was wrong. It just ended, which still proves that wars and the standing army are a threat to liberty. I mean, I don't understand then why you joined, but okay. Although I respect and I thank you for your service, I don't. It seems like you're kind of talking both ways out of your mouth. And then I responded with the point: the censorship in the Civil War was not wrong when you had a nation whose very survival was on the line and people calling for sedition/treason. So for people to suggest that that somehow the Lincoln administration preventing northern press from issuing statements that were for the Confederacy and sympathetic to the Confederacy and said, hey, we should let them go, and stopping them. I don't think that's a threat to the American liberties, because
Yeah.
when you literally have your nation literally on the line, you cannot have fifth columns in your back door literally promoting sedition and literally promoting the dissolution of the country, because remember, there was a point in time where, in 1862, where people thought that the South actually had a chance of winning, you know and
Yeah.
and so while President Lincoln may have, quote unquote violated press freedoms, you know, the fact of the matter is the South was literally executing its opposition. So while the North was shutting down presses that were trying to be sympathetic to the South, and yes, arresting fifth columns rightly, the South was literally just grabbing Union supporters in the South and just shooting them or lynching them. So who's the bad guy here?
Yeah. Well, also, like, if you want to destroy the union, it's like, well, I mean, some level of censorship might be necessary, right? Like, especially if you're trying to do it violently. I mean, it's like, what's the line with free speech? I mean, I don't know. I mean, these people are crazy. I mean, also they would probably like suppress free speech in the Confederate quote unquote country or whatever if they had it. So it's not like free speech really matters to them anyways. But I just find it so insane. Like, yeah, maybe don't call for like a violent, succession from the union. I think that's a pretty fair thing to ask from people. I don't think most people would want to do that, but I mean, these people are crazy, so they have crazy positions.
Yeah, because I mean, you cannot literally have these people in your backyard literally shouting down saying that the South should be able to leave. And it's kind of funny right here. I mean, I'm going to show you this other one where it says right here, fighting for survival, because the North would have ceased to exist if the South succeeded. He's essentially suggesting that the North would have continued to exist in the same manner without if the South seceded. I mean, what the heck's he talking about? If the South had successfully succeeded, it wouldn't have been a freaking union. But it would not have been. It would have been instead a nation divided, not a nation united, and
Yeah.
one nation that would have been slave. And not only that, the South wouldn't have simply been content with their slavery in the South. They wanted to expand slavery, so they would have probably seized Spanish territories in the Caribbean, like Puerto Rico. They might have even eventually cooperated with the French, Empire in Mexico to expand slavery there. The French Empire was occupying Mexico, essentially expand their imperial holdings. And not, I mean, we talked about too you know, the writings of that one professor. What's his name again? Professor Aaron Sheehan Dean, who's a professor of Southern Studies at Louisiana University and the author of a couple books, um, Confederates Fought, Family and Nation, Civil War, Virginia, and Concise Atlas of the U.S. Civil War. He already predicted too that Brazil at the time, which yes had slavery, would have been emboldened to keep it and expand it. Remember, Brazil had slavery then too, and that's where a lot of their Afro population comes from because they had slavery, and they were looking at the Civil War, and even after the Union won, they were desperately trying to keep the system afloat. But because the Union had won the war and slavery was ended, there was no way for them in the long term to keep it up perpetually. So eventually, they tried some means to keep it alive, but eventually had to dissolve it. But if the Confederacy have won, would that have happened? No way, because they would have had a trading partner who would have been more than willing to work with them and expand the system of slavery in Brazil. I mean, there is even there were even Southern, refugees who fled to, South America, and there are some communities down there that still carry, that Confederate flag.
Yeah. I think the weirdest thing is when I see it from people from the north, because I mean, I live in Michigan. I think a lot of people know that, but not even just in my state, but also like in upstate New York. I don't see it very often though, but like in certain areas, you'll see like a flag or two. I remember when I was going up to the Mackinac Bridge, I mean, like you see like a couple on the side of the road, like or whatnot. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, you're not even in the South. You have no connection to Southern culture. It doesn't even make any sense for you. And, you know, again, like for people in the South, it's like, it's such a disdain, you know, and I just think there's better parts of Southern culture that you can celebrate. I think that's just such a stain and just horrific acts that were done during that time. It's like, why are people trying to celebrate this? You know, um, I know a lot of states, what was it, Mississippi or Alabama, like years ago, that changed their flag to resemble something else a little bit more. So a lot of states have kind of moved on from that, though. But of course, there's people within those states that haven't fully moved on from that. It's just, it's I don't know, man. It's pretty crazy. Um, Also, the other thing too is some of those statues that you see in the South. I don't know if all of them were taken down yet, though, but some of them weren't actually built until like the 1900s too. Um, like a lot of them were built like way after the Civil War, like decades, 3, 4, 5, 6 decades, and a lot of people don't know that. So there's a lot of things that they've done to preserve this culture that they want, and we've never touched it. You know, we've always pandered to them a little bit. We've always said like, hey, you still want to keep this pride or whatever, we'll keep, you can keep that pride. You know, it's only really been in recent decades that we've been a little bit more, I guess maybe against that in some sense, though. But again, like we've appeased these people a lot, even though that they've lost. So I just find the complaining and moaning to just be just super cringe.
Absolutely. I think it's absolutely just disgusting. You know, uh, I mean, the fact of the matter is that, when you have people who believe this nonsense, like it's just sad because what they're doing is perpetually carrying um, this nonsense. It's so ridiculous. And I, I'm actually looking through some of the old tweets that this guy MDVet4Peace gave, and I'm going to show you my coming response to one that because I looks like I missed one. It says right here, I want peace and freedom for all, given the evidence that slavery can end without war. It is my preference that slavery can end peacefully. I mean, there is so actually a misrepresentation of history. It suggests that because slavery ended in Brazil, quote unquote, peacefully, that slavery could end peacefully. Slavery in Brazil did not end because the Brazilian authorities and the Brazilian ruling class said, "Oh, we've been absolutely terrible to our slaves. This has been wrong. We're going to give them freedom, and we're going to pay them back all the back wages, and we're going to give them everything, and we're going to essentially get on our hands and knees and beg for forgiveness." That's not what happened. The states like Brazil, which is probably what MD Vet for Peace is suggesting, because that was written in a book um, that Ron Paul was, I think, either a co-author in or at least gave a good review of, and talked about, suggesting that because Brazil ended slavery peacefully, why couldn't it have happened in the Union? Slavery did not end in the world peacefully just because people had a change of heart. It ended in part because slaves took up arms and said that we're tired of being treated like chattel. We're human beings, for God's sake. We have rights. And if you're not going to give us our rights, we're going to take them. And so to suggest that slavery ever ended without some effort of slave populations fighting for their rights is totally ridiculous. So the abolition movement, again, in America, was not just simply an evangelical movement of Christians who said slavery is an affront against God, but it was also in part, supporting the idea that slaves have basic human rights. And slave uprisings were promoted by the abolitionists because they understood that no slave is obligated to serve his or her master. And so to suggest that slavery ever ended without war entirely is a false misrepresentation of history. And that's what I'm going to respond to this person right here, to MDVet4Peace. So to make a clear point that that is just a complete misrepresentation of history. I mean, what do you, I mean, because I mean, you would agree with me, right? That you have that no system of slavery ever really ended without some effort, without some form of revolutionary action on behalf of slaves to fight for their freedom. I mean, because again, without it, you cannot, without fighting for your freedom, without slaves fighting for their freedom, historically, there would have been, the evangelical in Great Britain and the United States to end slavery would not have been successful.
Gotcha. Oh, wait, can you hear me now? I'm sorry,
Yes.
my headphone died there for a second. Sorry about that. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I mean, I think not only that, on top of that, just for the decades, and I mean decades of political buildup, just to even get like movements and organizations together to even put pressure on people to get rid of slavery, that took forever, that wasn't just like, oh, like people will change their minds one day. I mean, like people say the same thing about segregation. Like it's not just, oh, like people will change their minds one day. Like this takes a very long effort, you know it's one of those things where it's like, a few people believe this, and like, you have to really build up like a massive political movement in order to even pressure politicians, whether it be kings or queens, or I guess prime ministers or whoever. I mean, it's a long battle politically. It's not easy. I mean, people think this can be done in like a couple weeks. Like that's not how it works, like these things for like long standing issues that people were pressing, getting the word out, trying to recruit people, trying to like, convince people to like say, hey, like slavery is actually bad. Like this wasn't like done overnight, whether it be in America or anywhere else in the world, and I find it really crazy that people think this was just like done in a very short span of time, because that's not how most things are, you know, with a lot of with unjust systems like that.
So for anyone who thinks that this is an anti-Southern position, like this right here, this tweet, message, I don't like when people make fun of Southerners. This isn't making fun of Southerners. We're not attacking Southerners. We're attacking the system, the idea of Neo-Confederates, of the idea that the South should have won the war, and that it wasn't really that bad of a system, and it was. A lot of Southern people today I've met, they are extremely friendly, they're extremely nice, they're extremely hospitable. They're some of the nicest people you have around, and people notice that. They call you sir or ma'am, they invite you over for food, they invite you over, they're extremely friendly, they're extremely generous. And that's something to be admired about Southern culture, is that, about that. It's a great aspect. I wish that more people were like that. I live over in Arizona, and we're almost like a hodgepodge of tons of different, groups, because we have people from Chicago, people from LA, people from New York, local Arizonans who have been here for generations. And so we have this weird mishmash, of like all sorts of different groups. But the people here, like I would say, are becoming almost kind of an extension of Southern California. And I don't, and so I grew up very much a respectful household where you call someone sir, you call someone ma'am, and that was just how it was. And I try to call someone ma'am or miss, and then they take that with offense. It's like, why are you calling me ma'am? I'm not old. And it's like, what the heck's your problem? I'm just being polite. Like I once called at work this guy sir, and he's like, okay, are you a policeman or army man? I'm like, no. Well, then don't call me sir, okay? Call me this. And I'm like, well, buddy, you didn't tell me to call you this, okay? And I was just being polite. And so there are lots of great things about Southern culture that I really respect and like. But this is about another topic. This is about Neo-Confederates and people who think that the South should have won. The fact of the matter is that Sherman should have gone farther and should have taken the war much harder to the Confederacy. And by his action, he helped end a terrible war. And I want to show something. Another message on the tweets right here. That's right here. You know, this person right here, Lord Stephen Church, says, imagine thinking simply holding the position of being anti-war means you're automatically pro anything else. Being anti-war only means that you're pro-peace, guys. It doesn't mean he's pro-states like slavery. Okay, this is my response. Anti-intervention against the South in the Civil War was and is a pro-slavery position, whether you intended to be or not. No if and or buts about it. Because if you're not willing to fight against the Confederacy, who literally was fighting again for slavery, then you are essentially saying that you are okay with slavery in the South. It's just a fact. You can't get around it. And it's not anti-war, it's not pro-war, it's pro-intervention, anti-intervention. And you know what? If you want to say, oh no, it's pro-war, well, I'm pro-war against systems like the Confederacy, who believed that literally people should be held like property. And if you're not willing to fight against that, you know, then what are you willing to fight against? Probably nothing, in my mind. What do you think,
Yeah,
Anthony?
exactly. No, yeah, exactly. I mean, I posed the question before. Like, if you can't even fight against slavery, what is it then? I can't think of really very few things that are just as awful. Like, this is really, I mean, I expect this to be the bar at least, but unfortunately on Twitter, that's, I guess, too much. It's too much, because a lot of people are anti-interventionists, so I guess it doesn't entirely surprise me because there's a lot of clowns on the internet. It's, and also, I said this before too, like when it comes to Southern culture, like there's a lot of good things about it. There's good food, there's different architecture. I even think the accent's kind of cool. I mean, I don't know, like there's all these, I think there's cool things about it, and I believe that this part of history is a stain on it, and I think people should not only know about this, but not praise it, you know? You can live in the South, you can be a Southerner or whatever. I think that's fine. But, I think this glorification of, really this awful regime, I just think is unacceptable. So, and again, I think people should promote the positives of Southern culture, not the negatives.
Absolutely. You know, I mean, libertarians, I mean, and here's the sad part is that some of these people who actually espouse these positions are veterans, and it's very disappointing, you know, because we would hope that veterans, would have strong positions for, defending these people and defending the rights of these people. But unfortunately, libertarian, Paleo-Libertarian propagandists and Paleo-Conservative propagandists have been very effective in essentially fooling and duping, former veterans into believing these positions because they understand that their position is stronger if they can get veterans on side. And so that's what essentially they do, which is very disappointing. And I got, it's kind of fun. I want to show you one interesting little tweet thing right here. It's right here. So what happened is the person got pretty mad. Here it is. And so Neoco Alex R said, what does this discussion have to do with neoconservatives? I'm not neocon, I'm just someone with basic understanding of American history. And the RDF's like, RDF and his pals are on the threads, are all neocons. Was I replying to you? He essentially was saying, well, I wasn't replying to you, so shut up. But of course, this just showed he was triggered. And I like to respond with this, oh, is a little man mad that he's all alone? How sad. Not Neo-Confederate loser. Because the thing about these arguments is they try to say, oh, well, shut up, okay? I know more than you. No, you don't. If you have the position that's wrong, you're wrong. I respect your service as a veteran, and I thank you for it. But but you cannot say that because you are a veteran and you espouse a position of that is supportive of Neo-Confederates, or that you think the South should have seceded, that somehow you have a more credible position. No, history completely shows that you're completely wrong. The historical record of the abuses that the Confederacy engaged in pre the war and during the war on the slave population was absolutely abominable. And there's no defense of that system whatsoever. There's only one solution, which was at the end war. Because the South saw that one, it could end slavery either then or over time, and eventually their wealth as a slave owning class would be lessened, and they would just have to change with the times. Or B, they could fight a war, and if they won it, they could keep all their wealth and keep their system. And they chose that. They chose to let hundreds of thousands of other men die, defending their wealth and their privilege and their white supremacy, rather than change and stop what they were doing. So this whole idea that somehow that we could have ended slavery in America without a war is just sad and disappointing, and it's just not true. War was inevitable. Once the compromise was made by the founding fathers to let the South continue slavery, and
Yeah.
it's a blight on our history, and it's a sad thing because the founding fathers did it because our American republic was very fragile then. It was. Because even though the American Revolution had been won, still a wealthy Southern aristocracy that had money in slavery. And the best time, though, to have ended slavery would have been then, but they were worried that the South might itself secede from the newly formed nation, and they decided to make that compromise, and they compromised on our Constitution and our Bill of Rights and everything that we had fought to fight for. And so it's a stain in our that had ramifications for not just a few years, but for generations.
Yeah. One thing I would like to point out too is I feel like when it comes to a lot of these people, I noticed a pattern, especially with other regimes or tyrants or whatever systems, is people will do more of like a soft apologia for it. So like for example, like they'll say something along the lines of like, "Oh, I think slavery is bad though, but they should still have a right to exist." It's one of those kind of ways that they justify it though, right? Like they kind of do like a double speak, kind of like soft like uh I can't think of the word right now, but basically, it's basically just doing that. And again, like the thing is, a lot of people aren't gonna be like super open about it as much. So again, you just have to look out for those kind of like whether it be dog whistles or people implying that. Because people are never gonna be super explicit, which is something I learned, especially on Twitter or Clubhouse or Facebook or other social media websites. And that's something very important to remember. So really read between the lines, really understand the subtext of what people mean, so that way you're able to understand, because a lot of people try to get away with things by not being open about it, right? You have to be a bit more stealth when you talk about it, especially for these guys, you know. So, it's just something to just be mindful of though, because not everyone's gonna be, open about what they're saying. So just keep that in mind.
Exactly. You know, I think that the matter has been decided. History has decided it, and we know that if the South had won the war, if Neo-Confederates had their way, or if people like MD if had been listened to, during that time, MD-Vet4Peace. Let's say if MD-Vet4Peace had been born back then, and he himself, as a veteran, said, I think that we should let the South go and we shouldn't fight a war." If we had listened to that position, hundreds of thousands of people would have remained in a system where they were literally treated as property, not even as second-class citizens, as property. And we would have seen it continued in other nations like Brazil. We would have seen it expanded into the Caribbean, and it would have been a blight on our history. It would have been terrible for, human rights across the globe. Let's look at people, I mean, like people like George McClellan, okay, who was a Union officer and fought in the Union. You know, he was even of the position that the South should be allowed to go, you know, and should we have listened to that position? No. And was Abraham Lincoln a veteran? No, he was not. But but he was right. So simply, so what people like MDVet4Peace, um, and people who supported him like Arion or Air_E_on, who support these positions, I respect them for their service. I really do. I thank them that they serve their country. But that doesn't make you right, and that doesn't give you a pedestal to sit on. It essentially is a saying that if you're a veteran, therefore my position on is correct, and you just need to shut up. It kind of reminds me of people with Tulsi Gabbard. Oh, well, she's a veteran and she criticized the Iraq War, or she, and she criticizes intervention in Syria, so she must be right. Yet when other veterans, like Dan Crenshaw, say that we should stay in Afghanistan, and that they rail on him, attack him, call him pro-war, and even suggest doing harm to him, like Hassan Piker did. So it's not so these isolationists, they don't care about veterans. They're really props for their disgusting ideology. And we saw, and not only did it happen, is it happening now? I mean, it happened back then even too. Do you think those Southerners in the those Confederates in the South cared about people like George McClellan? No. If they would have shot him on the battlefield if they saw him, but the people like him who thought that that the North should negotiate with the South were just tools for fifth columns in the North who who wanted to let the South go and wanted to keep slavery continuing, and for treasonous seditionists in the South who were fighting for white supremacy and slavery.
Right, right. And again, you see this time and time again of people trying to, justify these regimes or, radical systems that are clearly in a violation of, freedom, individual liberty, and opportunity, and all kinds of things. And I think the biggest thing is, what I like to say is, again, a lot of people don't really believe this. It's mostly just fringes on the internet. So I always normally have like a good time sleeping at night because I know a lot. Because I know a lot of these people have like like they're crazy. They have insecurity issues or some other crap going on. And like what you see on Twitter is more represented on there than what it is in real life. And I think that's always important to remember. For every person that believes in the Confederacy, there's hundreds of others people who don't. And I think that's just a good thing to always remember when debating these people.
Exactly, for sure, because we know we're right. Our position has been proven, and so we need to keep fighting for that. You know, and so Anthony, we're hitting up on the around the hour mark. I want to thank you so much for coming on to have this discussion with me. I really appreciate it. Um, anyway, if any of you of my audience are interested in who this person MDVet4Peace is, this is his profile right here. He says that defend the guard, but it should rather say what he means is defund the guard, which with some really sad isolationist takes. Um, Anyway, I mean, because again, unfortunately, we have there's a lot of isolationist cringe on Twitter that we have to combat against. So this is the second part of my series, Isolationist Hacks and Quacks, responding to MDVet4Peace at Twitter handle MDVet4 and his positions that were supportive of the Confederacy, which were wrong and immoral. And I want to thank you, Anthony Roberto, for coming on to discuss this with me. I know I and the audience really appreciated your takes. Any final thoughts? If not, you can go.
Yeah. Just as real quick, well, whenever you debate these people, just make sure you always know what you're talking about. Make sure you have all the information with you. Go point by point with your structure. When you're talking to these people, call everything out that you see as BS. Not saying that you guys are better arguing or anything like that though, but just as like a general statement. Make sure you're firm on your positions, you're consistent and all that kind of stuff. And anyone who's looking from the outside when seeing these arguments will know that you're the winner and obviously the other guy's the loser, right? So, just make sure, you look presentable whenever you argue with these people and you should do fine. Um, you know, so it's one of those things. And another thing to always remember though too is that like when you're arguing with these people, even if you don't convince the other person that you're debating with, just know that there's people looking from the outside, and that's what I think is the most important thing. Because I think some people get a little too in the weeds when it comes to debating. So that's what I would have to say though. But if you guys like what I said, I'm at Anthony M. Roberto on Twitter or also Global Affairs. I have the same PFP that you can see here. So if you want to see my content there, that's good. And I come on YouTube every now and again though to discuss things, foreign policy or domestic policy as well. And yeah, thanks for having me on Net7. It's been a good time.
No problem. Thank you so much for coming on. And I'm going to post your Twitter handle right here so the audience can see it. Please, everyone, go and subscribe to him. You also have a YouTube channel, also, don't you?
No, I just have a YouTube account.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't end up making the channel. I just have the account though. But you can find me on Twitter. I'm there. I always talk there. And I'm always happy to come on shows.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Anthony Roberto. You have a great day.
Yeah, see ya.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for coming on. I do appreciate it. And looks like we even had, wow, Quick Sticks production actually at one point was in the video. And I dedicated the first video in my series, Isolationist Hacks and Quacks, to him. So, well, that's a bit surprising. Well, Quick Sticks Productions, if you ever want to debate on my channel, you're certainly welcome to, and we can have one of my friends on Twitter moderate. That would be very fun. Anyway, I want to thank you all for tuning in, and I agree with Anthony Roberto. We've got to challenge isolationism on social media. Often, we have to ensure that we are fighting the culture war online, and obviously we can be respectful. I mean, obviously, MDVet4Peace is a veteran, and so we want to be respectful of veterans. But that doesn't mean we should not push back on their isolationist positions. We have to confront it, and we have to fight this culture war. That we have to be pro-intervention against dictators, despots, and tyrants around the world. Anyway, thank you all so much for coming. Have a great day, everyone, and don't forget, death to all tyrants.